a label will say, hey, we're looking for the latest and greatest, right? We want the artist that goes viral with nonsense, right? Because they want to attach to it and monetize it. So the song could be
Sure, sure,
trash, but
sure.
if they got 300 million views, a label's so thirsty to make money, they're going to jump on it, right? Sync
Mhm.
doesn't work like that. You could have, I know artists that have like probably like 100 followers like on Instagram, but they make amazing music, and sync agents are all over it because a lot of times they like to be the first ones to, it's like bragging rights, right? It's
Oh,
like,
really?
yo,
Okay.
yeah, like, hey, we broke this right here. Like
Yeah.
nobody else was up on this.
Hello, you beautiful musicians, and welcome back to the Musician Guidance Podcast. If you're new around here, my name's Mac. I'm the founder of Musician Guidance and podcast host. Today, I'm joined alongside a musician, entrepreneur, and CEO of Rhythm Couture. He has songs in over 1,000 TV shows and films, and his company has got placements in some of the world's biggest brands, including Calvin Klein, Vans, Wix, and the New York Times. Without further ado, Kyle Hunter, also known as K Sparks. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great, man. How you feeling, man? I'm happy to be here, man.
I appreciate that. I'm happy to have you here. And it's truly my pleasure because, I've been doing a lot of research on you and just what you've been able to accomplish is unreal. And I'm super excited to pick your brain for myself and also to help our community. Before we get into all of that, though, for those listening in, tell us a little bit more about your story and how you got into music.
Oh yeah, most definitely. So I grew up in a very musically inclined household. So my dad was a jazz player. My mom, she was very much so into like gospel music.
Okay.
So every day there was music being played in our house. And that's how I really got introduced to music initially. Um, in the beginning, I really wasn't so much into wanting to be an artist. I was always very creative. So I
Mhm.
love to draw. Like drawing is one of those talents that I just naturally had. So I could look at something, just draw it very accurately,
Oh, wow.
whether that's cartoons or whatever. That was my thing. So for a lot of years, like I was just drawing, doing comic books, all kind of stuff. Um, and then I started to really get into music in terms of actually wanting to be an artist because in my hood, I grew up in Queens, New York.
Okay.
So in that neighborhood, like we have a very rich culture when it comes to music. So whether that's Run DMC, Cool G Rap, LL Cool J, and then you take it, to people as it progressed, like Nas, you got
Mhm.
G Unit. Queens are just very culturally inclined when it comes to music, especially hip hop culture. So I remember when I first heard a hip hop record and it was Cool G Rap, and I was like, wow, this is amazing, man, because he was like telling a story that was so vivid and so intricate. So it was like you could actually visualize everything he was saying. And I was like, wow,
Mhm.
this is amazing. So initially it just started out for me like just freestyling. So I would do a lot of freestyling in my neighborhood, go around doing a lot of different rapping showcases and
That's
all this
awesome.
stuff. And then yeah, and then
Yeah.
that progressed. One day when I was in high school, I met a cat by the name of JD. And JD always intrigued me because he didn't go to class and I didn't go to class. So like we 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 always walk the halls. And I'm like, yo, who's this guy who's just like me? He doesn't care.
Right.
Right. So one day I was like, yo, what's up? He's like, yo, what's up, man? And then we just hit it off. And that's one of my great friends to this day. And JD actually had a home studio in his house.
Okay.
So he's like, yo, you should come to the studio. So I came to the studio. He had an 8-track, all this stuff, and we started like recording. And that was actually my start in regards to creating music, getting involved with it. And then from there, I started doing like a lot of mixtapes, selling them locally. The buzz grew, started doing a weekly series called Manic Mondays, where we put out a song every week for an entire year.
Wow.
And that just took off. That just went crazy. So once that went crazy, I had a lot of record deals on the table, signed a lot of deals, then went independent,
Okay.
sold a lot of records, a lot of music independently. And then I got approached by a sync agent who introduced me to the world of sync. So, we could dive into that a little bit more,
Mhm.
to give some detail, but that's a pretty much glossed over start of how I got started with music and introduced to sync at least.
That's awesome. I love the story because, we always hear of the success, but the story and the grind and just the unique paths that everybody goes down. I love that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And now,
Definitely.
obviously, you touched on sync there. You have, an incredible amount of experience, in sync. And so, yeah, let's get into discussing that a little bit because it's such a hot topic. I can't even tell you how many times I get asked about it every week. So I guess we'll start very basic and then we'll kind of go up from there. So just to start us off, what exactly is sync licensing?
All right. So essentially, sync licensing is the process of getting music accompanied with media. So any form of media that you could think of, whether that's television, whether that's the internet, whether that's film, whatever it is, that is the process of sync. And when we talk about sync licensing, essentially what we're talking about is that marriage and artists being able to monetize that. So when a company wants to use your record, they'll either reach out to you directly or they'll reach out to your sync agent. Like I have a few sync agents.
Okay.
So they do a lot of the legwork, but I also own a sync licensing company where we have staff that actually pitch on the behalf of artists too. So I got a lot of moving parts.
Sure.
But what happens with that process is that once, let's say that they call it the client, once the client comes forward with a brief, a musical brief is going to break down what their request is, and it's also going to talk about their budget. So they'll say,
Okay.
hey, we got this Coca-Cola commercial. Budget is $20,000. And we want to use an original composition that talks about how great soda is, a feel-good vibe. Like we want people to
Sure.
really vibe with it. And in that brief, they'll also accompany that with different types of similar songs that they might be looking for. So they'll say, hey, we want something like this Kanye West record or this Kendrick Lamar record. So they're
Right.
going to give you specific examples of what they're looking for. And then you provide that music. And once that music is provided, if they like it, then you get paid. And the compensation for sync is really great because you get compensated on the front end. So let's say they pay you like $15,000, $20,000 up front. That's yours.
Right.
Now, after you get paid that, then you get paid mechanicals too. So on the back end, once you have your performing rights organization, whether that's ASCAP, BMI, you're going to see royalties for that based upon when it's played. So if it's aired on television, if it's aired digitally, you get all these different types of mechanical royalties. And in addition to that, if you own the master, which most artists should do if a label's not involved, in addition to that, then you'll see revenue from streaming. You'll see revenue from digital downloads. So, I always tell musicians when it comes to sync and music licensing, it's always like the great equalizer. Like it is something that you can utilize to actually create a lot of revenue for yourself. And, we preach financial literacy, and
Okay.
I'm big on that because, I hate the term struggling artists or starving artists. I feel like
Sure.
society has labeled that stigma, as the artist
Agreed.
who, hates, doesn't want to be a bartender, but just does it because they need stable income, right? And it's like, that narrative is so old. There's so many musicians, including myself, that are doing so well financially, and you don't have to be in that place where you're struggling, especially when there's avenues where you can monetize your music.
Definitely. I don't think there's any doubt how great sync can be, and you definitely touched on some of the advantages there. But there's also, a lot of competition for it. So I'd like to talk about, and you did touch on it, but some of the best ways for musicians to go about getting sync placements. So you mentioned sync agents. Is that a necessity, or is it more, getting the music on libraries, building connections with music supervisors? I'll just leave the floor open to you to answer that.
Of course. So what I tell people is that there's no one size fits all.
Mhm.
So meaning that everyone's situation is different. So I tell a lot of artists that are trying to get started in sync that might not necessarily be familiar with the process. Music libraries are a good start because when you get your music into music libraries, if listeners aren't familiar with that, that's basically like a library of music. It's digital. They have your music in that catalog. They have different types of metadata
Mhm.
that is utilized to allow people that are looking for certain types of music to find you. So if you're a hip hop artist, your metadata will have hip hop. They'll have artists that you sound similar to. So they
Right,
might put
right.
Nas, LL. So when they go in there, they can find you easy. I find that those music libraries often they're able to help artists get a start so they could kind of get familiar with the process.
Okay.
So if you're an artist just starting out, that could be an easy in for you. Then there's also music supervisors. I know artists who reach out directly to music supervisors. That process is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is challenging for some artists if you don't have those relationships, because they're going to curb you. They're going to look in the inbox. They're like, nope, don't know you.
Sure.
Right. So, you know, and a lot of times they do that because they have to protect themselves too, because there's a lot of times where musicians will sue, right? They'll sue music supervisors, they'll sue music licensing companies, and they'll say, oh, well, you stole my song, and you didn't steal it, right? Like, you know, you might have never even heard it, but
Right.
they, you know, this, you never know people's intentions. So they have to have checks and balances to protect themselves.
For
So
sure.
it's rather hard to reach out to music supervisors. Normally they prefer to deal with sync agents,
Okay.
and sync agents are the ones that have those reputations and they have those relationships with the music supervisor. Now, why do they prefer sync agents? Because sync agents are able to vet the artist. So that means that these songs that they're being provided, they know that this sync agent already knows the industry. They knows, okay, we have to have these songs cleared within a certain amount of time. We don't want to have to go through the process of worrying, all right, how many writers are on this song? How many producers? Is everybody on board? Does everybody have publishing? You know, are there no samples? So that alleviates the headache. And that's why they go through sync agents. So I always tell artists, you know, once you get your feet wet in the industry, and if you go through a music library, then you can graduate to a sync agent.
Okay.
And sync agents are normally very particular, so they don't take on a whole bunch of artists. um I actually, when I first got introduced to my first agent, they reached out after I did my weekly series, Manic Mondays, and they were like, hey, you know, we love your music, we want to give you a sync deal. So I'm like, okay, I didn't know what it was at the time.
Right.
You know, I'm like, man, these people trying to get my money, man. I'm like, you know, as an artist, everybody trying to get your money, man,
Sure.
right?
I know.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, right. So, you know, they sent over the contract, and the contract, it was viable. You know, everything was appropriate. There was nothing underhanded. So, you know, it went great. You know, so I say all that to say is that, you know, once artists go through that process of they get familiar with the whole process of a music licensing library, yeah, sync agent is natural progression to find those things. I mean, Google's your best friend. Like I always tell artists, like utilize that. Like we're living in an age right now of technology, and everybody has the world at their fingertips. It's like, you know, your phone is basically a computer, and you have that
Yeah.
power in your hands that you can harness. So, you know, the world is your oyster. You can take full advantage, and you don't have to be in a position where, you know, you kind of like at a loss. Like knowledge is power. So every day, just try to educate yourself on the process, and everything you need is online. So, you know, like I said, those are really like the trifectas, like music licensing libraries, sync agents, and then artists that just try to pitch themselves directly.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to sync agents in a bit because I agree that's the main thing. But talking about music supervisors, you mentioned they like to deal with sync agents because the sync agent vetted the artist and all that. Is there
Mhm.
anything in particular that music supervisors look for that makes a song desirable to them, though, that I guess the sync agent represents? And I guess what I'm trying to really get at here
Mhm.
is it just the music, or is it also the musician's brand, their following, their previous success? Does all that play a role?
Well, you know what? To be honest with you, the great thing about sync licensing is that none of that stuff really matters in the sync
Okay.
world. You know, those are more like music industry standards where it's like a label will say, hey, we're looking for the latest and greatest, right? We want the artist that goes viral with nonsense, right? Because they want to attach to it and monetize it. So the song could be
Sure, sure,
trash,
sure.
but if they got 300 million views, a label so thirsty to make money, they're going to jump on it, right? Sync
Mhm.
doesn't work like that. You could have, I know artists that have like probably like 100 followers like on Instagram, but they make amazing music, you know, and sync agents are all over it because a lot of times they like to be the first ones to, it's like bragging rights, right? It's
Oh,
like,
really?
yo,
Okay.
yeah, you know, like, hey, we broke this right here. Like
Yeah.
nobody else was up on this, you know, and it's also better for them too, because a lot of times, you know, some artists, not all artists, but some artists can be very egotistical and their
Sure.
heads get very big. So it's like, you know, once they get a blue check and they're verified, they feel like can't nobody tell them nothing. So they, you know, so they're like, you know, this is not good enough for me, right? So a lot of times, like, you know, music supervisors don't mind working with artists who, you know, they don't have big followings, they're not a big deal per se when it comes to popularity, but their music is a big deal. Like it sounds great, you
That's
know?
interesting. Wow.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, man. Yeah.
Awesome. And then when looking at the other side, when looking at sync agents, which we touched on again, is there anything in particular they look for? And I know you just kind of described following doesn't necessarily matter, but I guess
Mhm.
are they looking for music that they already have a placement for, or are they just coming across great music and then kind of pitching that to a supervisor?
Yeah, so what it really boils down to a lot of times, every brief is different. So, depending on the needs of the brief, there might be someone that says, "Hey, we need cinematic hip hop and we want a big record," right? So,
Hmm.
that might be the case where they'll say, "Okay," they'll tell the scene agent, "All right, we need hip hop and we need cinematic, like big orchestra combined with like, big buildups, big
Okay.
drops." Cinematic type drums, right? They're very
Sure.
detail specific. Then they might say, hey, we need something like a Tribe Called Quest. We want like some neo soul type hip hop. Or they might say, we want like a Britney Spears type record. So, yeah, I would say it's just tailored to the briefs that they have.
Okay. And are they scout, like I say the word scouting, are they looking at like artists on Instagram, only on music libraries, or where are they finding their artists?
Yeah, a lot of times like they'll scour the internet sometimes, like
Okay.
they'll just, come across stuff. That's why I tell artists all the time, you know what? Don't be afraid to shoot your shot. Like closed mouths don't get fed. And at the end of the day, it's like you have to be willing to
I
put
like
yourself
that.
out there. The worst thing that can happen is someone tell you no,
And if
right?
you don't even ask, it's already a no.
And if you don't ask us already a no, and I always say, listen, you hang around the basket long enough, you're gonna get a rebound. So, you got to stay in the game. You got to hustle, right? Like you got to have that hustle mentality. Like, that's the difference between people that succeed and people that don't get their needs met. Because I think a lot of times people that don't get their needs met, especially musicians, they overthink, right? And they're like, oh, I don't want to put myself out there like that. But if you
Mhm.
never put yourself out there like that, you're never going to get exposed, and everything is a lesson. Like it's a learning process. It's a constant process of what works and what doesn't work. And the only way you're going to find that out is by reaching out. You might be pleasantly surprised. It could be like freaking, you know, 10:30 p.m. at night and you just happen to slide into the DM of a music supervisor and they might not be doing anything. They're home eating, potato chips or something. They're like, all right, let me just respond to this guy. You
Watching the
never know.
Lakers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. You never know. You never know. So it's like, hey, shoot your shot, man. Shoot your shot. You
I
know.
couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I've personally done too. You never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And the more messages you send, the more you'll learn. Like you'll see who you get replies from, what you sent in those messages. You can then
Mm-hmm.
tweak them, right? Make them more
Mm-hmm.
valuable. No,
Yeah.
that's it. Exactly.
That's it. That's
There
it.
you go. And I got a question here from one of our community members. His name is Jo. So
Mm-hmm.
he owns a master's to his music. And
Mm-hmm.
he asked, how do I place my music on other platforms? And I guess building off that too, how does ownership and copyright work with audio libraries and getting placements?
So there's a lot of layers to that. So what's his name again?
Jayo, Jayo.
JL.
Yeah.
All right. Shout out to JL. Big shout out. So thanks for the question. So there's a lot of layers that work to that. The first one is I always tell artists, maintain ownership. That's key. Like when you own your masters, you have leverage. Now in terms of like how does it work and how does it play out? Well, it kind of gets a little convoluted depending on the contract that you sign. So you've got a lot of different types of contracts. The first one is exclusive, right? An exclusive agreement is basically like a marriage. It's a company saying, hey, for this term, you're only going to be able to work with us. So the term might be 2 years, right? Then
Okay.
after the end of that term, then you normally have the option to renegotiate. So whether you want to continue that business arrangement or you want to leave it, that's up to you. That's up to the company as well. Exclusive agreements, the problem with those a lot of times is that obviously you can't shop that music around anywhere else. So it's married to that company. So when it's good, it's good. And when it's bad. Like I've signed exclusive agreements that have been great, where it's like, all right, the company's hitting, they're doing what they got to do, and making a lot of money. Then I've signed exclusive agreements with some songs that did absolutely nothing. And now your song is tied into a contract for
Sure.
2 years. You can't move it around. So it could be like a trick bag. It could go either way. Non-exclusive, a lot of artists like non-exclusive because that's like dating. Like you can just pretty much do what you got to do, right? Like you move around, You have no ties to hold you down. So artists like that, because it gives them the freedom to put their music in different libraries, especially when you own the masters, like Jo said. Now, the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive, from what I've experienced, and wow, I've been in this business for a long time. So probably like, let me think, like 15 years I've been in the sync industry now. So
Wow.
from what I've experienced, the exclusive agreements normally pay more. So, for a
Interesting.
placement, like, yeah, you can get like 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, $20,000 for a placement. Non-exclusive normally pays less. So I've seen like, $3,000 payouts, $4,000 payouts, so it's not as much as you would get exclusive. And the reason
Mhm.
why is because once we talk about like bragging rights, right? Like music supervisors, a lot of times they don't want to have the same record that everybody else has. So when you think about it, like if you put on a TV show and you see like 8 different shows on Netflix, but they got the same song, it kind of gets redundant, right? It's like, oh,
Sure.
here we go again, right? It's
Yeah,
like listening
yeah,
to the radio. It's like the same
yeah.
stuff, right? So, but then when you hear something that you never heard before, that's like refreshing, you're like, oh, what's that? So, that's the allure with the exclusive. It's like the sync agent has the leverage to say, hey, listen, this song is exclusive. So it's not in a lot of libraries. It's only in ours. It's a great record. And they're like, all right, cool. That's dope.
Mhm.
So that's the difference between that. I mean, there's also custom music available when you own your masters.
Okay.
So I've had situations where like Les Mills reached out. They wanted to use some music for their international global fitness campaign. So you're able to get like a higher rate for stuff like that. So yeah, owning your masters, you can definitely leverage it with different types of contractual agreements. And that's a great question that Jo had. I mean, pretty much in order to get your music out there, it would go back to what we just spoke about, like, what you would like to reach out to, whether that be music licensing libraries, whether you want to Google sync agents,
Right.
whether you want to do it yourself, you know.
And you talked about exclusive agreements that you had, that some were great, some were
Mhm.
not so great. Is there any way to tell which ones are going to be good? Is it working with more reputable companies, or is it certain clauses to maybe look out for in contracts? Or
So you know what I do? What I normally like to do is I go to the website.
okay,
I'll see their roster. So if you go to the roster, and let's say that you're an R&B artist, but you see that they have like 30 R&B acts, that might not be the place for you. Because now what
okay,
happens is you're in a position where you're competing against people on the same roster as you for the same
sure.
placement.
Hmm.
So if a brief comes in and say, hey, we want to pay $15,000 for R&B record, now it's you and 30 other R&B artists that they have to sift through, as opposed to being on a smaller boutique roster where, let's say, maybe there's only 5 R&B acts. Your odds and percentages are higher, so you have to look at that. I would also say that also search those artists. So that's a trick, right? You
Okay.
go to the website, you see the artist roster. All right, I'm going to search you guys. I want to see, like, all right, if you guys got MC West, right? I'm going to Google MC West. I'm going to go to his social media because I want to see what he's posting. If he's not posting, hey, I got a placement here, they are doing absolutely nothing for MC West, and I don't want no parts of it, right?
Right.
Because it's like you can see the writing on the wall. I've even had artists reach out to me directly, like, hey, I see that you work with this company, um, how's your experience with that? There's nothing wrong with
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
right? They're just trying to make an informed decision. Absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I you touched on something too I want to hit too. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here to really provide as much information as we can. And you mentioned maybe going with a smaller boutique company is better in that sense. Would a smaller boutique sync licensing company though have less connections, or maybe get less opportunities than the bigger ones?
No, you know what? Not necessarily. Like, I know a lot of smaller boutique ones. And when I say smaller boutique, what I mean, not necessarily in terms of their connections or how
Okay,
much revenue they generate. I'm talking about the size of their roster.
I see. Okay.
So, right. So a lot of those companies are very highly selective. And that's a good thing too, right? Because that means that they're not taking the approach of artists like they're cattle, because you got a lot of sync companies like that too, where they just sign artists, sign artists, sign artists. And it's like, all right, look, think of it like a basketball team, right? Like if you got like 50 people on a basketball team, there's only 4 quarters in the game, right? How much playing time are you really going to get? And I tell artists, because I'm a sports head, so a lot of stuff I put in sports terms.
Okay.
It's like, you want to be in the starting five. That's your goal. As a musician, wherever you go, you got to be confident in your skill set. You got to be confident in your abilities, that you're a boss, that you'll boss up, you'll do what you have to do. And you don't want to be a bench warmer. You don't want to be a bench player, sitting on a sync roster, and you got like 2 placements for the year. Like, what is that? Right?
Sure.
Like, no, the goal is, to monetize your talents from, price to scale. So however much it costs you to make the music, you got to buy recording equipment, you got electricity, you got all these things that cost. It's not a free process to make
Mhm.
music, and your time, right? Your time is valuable. Your time is
For
money.
sure.
So, you want to make sure that you're properly leveraging your talents and your time and associating with companies and brands that can help you reach your goals.
Great advice. Great advice. And you have a company too, as I mentioned earlier, that has a roster of about 40 musicians, and you have
Mhm.
just got incredible placements. I touched on them earlier. Can you walk me through what your company does, and how you're able to get placements with such prominent brands?
Yeah, definitely. So me and my business partner, Robert Ron C, also known as SK, we've been in the music industry for a long time. Like Robert's had a lot of success. He's worked with a lot of prominent people as well.
Okay.
And, we came to the point where we were like, we really want to help artists. That was the whole purpose of us forming Rhythm Couture, right? It's a music licensing company, but not only do we do music licensing, like we also do financial literacy. But
Mhm.
I'll walk you through it. So
Sure.
when we first started Rhythm Couture, we wanted to really just help artists get syncs, because a lot of artists, they're talented, but they don't have the connections, or they just don't have the know-how, right? Because
Agreed.
there's a difference
Yeah.
between having a creative skill set with musicality as opposed to having a business mindset. And I understand that, like, not every artist is a businessman,
Sure.
and not every businessman or businesswoman is an artist. But when the two come together, that's a beautiful thing. So we decided that we were going to formulate the company to help artists, and that's what we do. We pitch their music, we get it in TV and film. We have a lot of viable relationships with music supervisors, music licensing companies, and it's funny how life works, because as that process progressed, we're passionate about helping people, like we're passionate about giving back. So we actually started up a learning academy in the process.
Okay.
And part of that is like we have e-courses that artists are able to educate themselves about the whole music licensing process. We do one-on-ones, we do consultations. We have a free weekly show every week, just free knowledge, called Sync Music Mondays, where it's just financial literacy for musicians, and it's free, and we're just
Mhm.
dropping gems, dropping jewels, big guests like just coming on the show. We just had shout out my brother MG, the mortgage guy from Earn Your Leisure. Like he was just on there, and we got like a lot of big guests
Wow.
coming out very soon. So yeah, just we're big on financial literacy for musicians. We feel that music is like the foundation when you think about it, for everything, right? Like whether
Mhm.
people are getting in their car and they're driving from point A to point B, they got on a radio, they
Sure.
got on, they got on a Spotify, Apple Music. Whether you go to a movie and the scenes are transitioning, there's music.
Yeah.
Music is the glue, it's the soundtrack to our lives. So being that that's the case, we really believe that artists should be compensated fairly, so
Mhm.
that's how we got started and where we're at right now.
I love it. I love everything you guys are doing. Keep it up. Keep it up.
Thank you.
And lastly, for those that maybe haven't come across, Rhythm Couture or your courses or other stuff you're talking about, where can they follow you and learn more about yourself and your company and keep up to date with all your content?
Yeah, definitely, man. So there's a couple of ways. I mean, I'm all over social media. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's K Sparks Music. Twitter, K Sparks TV. Company is rhythmcouture.com. And yeah, man, our main goal, man, we're just like showing love to musicians, educating them,
Love it.
And yeah, that's what we love to do, man. Just giving back, man. You know, we're not on this earth to be self-serving. I feel that
Mhm.
our whole purpose is to help each other. And that's the ultimate goal, man. You know, your legacy, how much money you make and all those things, like you can't take none of that stuff with you, but your legacy is what lives forever. Like were you a great person or were you a crappy person, right? And for me, it's
Exactly.
like, you know, being able to help people, that's key, you know.
For sure. And even to myself, I don't define success by the money you make or anything like that. I define it by how many people show up at your funeral. That's what I like to think about, because that's
Yeah.
really about the relationships you build.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's a fact. And I'll say this too, man. You know, I always say, well, two things I'll say this with. Persistence wears down resistance. So that's a key, right? For all artists that, you know, you might be struggling a little bit, or you
Mhm.
might be trying to find a way to pivot because maybe your career is not really going on the trajectory that you want. Just realize that persistence wears down resistance. So just understanding to stay at it and
Mhm.
being able to pivot. Like if you realize that something's not working, then make the necessary adjustments, right? Like, you
Mhm.
know, maybe you're using a hammer and for what you're trying to accomplish doesn't require a hammer. Maybe you got to use a screwdriver, right?
There you
So
go.
being able to change and pivot to do what you got to do. And then the last thing is collaboration is greater than competition. So I always tell people that, like, make sure you align yourself with like-minded people that want the same things that you want, people that are driven, that are motivated, because that'll help you take it to the next level.
There you go. You hit the nail on the head right there. It's been an
There you go.
absolute pleasure to have you on, Kyle. I really thank you for sharing, some really great knowledge with myself and our community. I know it's going to be extremely beneficial. Before I conclude this podcast, is there anything else you would like to share?
Nah, man. Thanks for having me, man. Shout out to all the listeners, man. I wish y'all nothing but the best, man. Definitely tapping with us. Sync Music Mondays, every Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Y'all can check it out on our
Awesome.
YouTube, Rhythm Couture.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. That is going to conclude this episode. For those watching, let Kyle be an inspiration to yourself. That if you're open to growth, open to new connections, and willing to work harder and smarter than many around you, your dream will soon become your reality. Until next time, take care and keep making music.